Welcome. I'm so grateful to be in front of all of you today. It's really been a dream of mine to bring together students, faculty, community stakeholders who all have an interest in aspects of this project, especially the social relationships piece. I know there's students here from education, from social work, psychology, some of the pre-health professions, and we're just really grateful and see the ways that those different departments have overlaps in terms of the kinds of things that we're studying related to social relationships. So I also want to begin with a word of thanks to all the people. Even though I'm up here by myself, this project was not done by myself. So first and foremost, I want to thank our participants. It is, of course, something that takes a lot of courage and vulnerability to put yourself out there and come meet a bunch of people you don't know and admit that maybe you have some growth areas that you want to be working on. I'd also like to thank all my student research assistants from over the past couple years, my team of co-therapists who will come and join me for the question and answer period, and also especially our funders, the Michigan Health Endowment Fund and the Adoptive Family Support Network. Thank you so much, as well as Calvin for giving me some release time to work on this project. So I'm hoping to share a little bit today about the program that we've been running for the last couple years. I'll start by putting it into some of the larger context about research on social competence, research on adoption, how those two things kind of connect. Then I'll describe a bit about the program that we've been running, who's been in it, what have we been doing with them. The program itself that we used is one that actually was originally developed for a totally different context. It was originally developed to treat autism. We've modified it quite a bit, but if that's an area of interest for you, this program might be something that you might encounter in other settings. I'll talk a bit about the results of our program and then end with what I'm hoping for the future. We'll have hopefully some good time for questions, so think of things that you'd like to ask our team at the end. So what is social competence? It's really the ways that we have effectiveness in our interactions with other people and within our relationships. And social skills are a related idea. Those are the skills that we need to achieve social competence. Now, there's a lot of different ways to kind of splice and dice social skills and divide them up. One of the more common models breaks them up into 4 different component areas. So social skills include social communication skills, like the verbal and nonverbal things that we do when we interact with other people. So like turn taking in conversation, where I say a little bit and then you say a little bit, and we might ask each other questions and share things about ourselves. It's a back and forth interaction. So that's social communication. Emotion regulation is the ability to control both the outward behavioral expressions of emotions and also our internal states of emotions while we're interacting with other people socially. So think about when you have a conflict with a friend, how you have to, while you're navigating that conflict successfully, you have to kind of control your emotions to be able to do that. Cognitive skills are things like attention or executive function that we need to implement to be successful socially. If I'm having a conversation with someone, I have to pay attention to them to be able to have that back and forth piece. And then the last is social problem solving skills. A lot of times in social settings, we have more than one option for how to respond. You know, in a conflict, we have a lot of different paths we could go down. And social problem solving skills allows you to think about what those different options are and then select the one that's going to make you the most socially successful. So these social skills develop over a long period of time, and mostly in the context of relationships. We practice them. These aren't just naturally things that we're born knowing how to do. We practice them, but what's interesting is so much of that happens very implicitly, meaning we don't have a lot of, in school or that kind of thing, explicit instruction on how to do a lot of these things. People just assume you just pick them up. The unfolding of this happens over time, and so at each developmental stage, you see different things that are important. In infancy, really the attachment figure, the caregivers, are the ones that are helping with the development of social skills because they're modeling those, they're providing a ton of structure. Really, the infant and the caregivers, that's your first and sometimes most important social relationship. As kids get older, preschool, elementary school, things change a bit. They start to have some more reciprocal peer interactions. They're no longer just playing next to each other, they're playing with each other, right? Still though, the caregivers or teachers are providing a lot of scaffolding and support. If a child wants to play with a friend after school, usually it's the parents that are organizing that play date. That changes and starts to change as kids get into adolescence. There, you're expecting those adolescents to be much more independent in initiating and making and maintaining friendships. They're much more on their own. Their parents are not setting up play dates. We're expecting them to start organizing those by themselves. At the same time, social groups start to form, cliques, groups, usually around a common interest, and that helps to solidify the group membership. And increasingly, adolescents are relying on their peers for more input into their decision-making, into their self-concept, their self-esteem, how they feel about themselves, that peers have a bigger and bigger influence as compared to caregivers than they did in the past. So this is kind of the trajectory all along. There's practice in relationship with other people to develop these skills. When you have successful or typical, trajectory here of development of social skills, you see a broad range of really positive outcomes. So, and not just in areas of social functioning. Teens who have good social skills, who have good friendships, tend to have a bit higher self-esteem. They're happier, they're less lonely. They have fewer internalizing symptoms, which are things like depression or anxiety. They have fewer externalizing symptoms, which are things like aggression. And these adolescent friendships form the basis for adult friendships and adult romantic relationships. So generally, if folks were satisfied with their friendships as teens, they also report being more satisfied in adulthood. The other piece, and this is particularly relevant for why we chose to do our study, is that these adolescent friendships can be a buffer or a way to promote resilience when maybe there has been some early adversity. So there's a growing body of literature to say, hey, when kids experience early adversity early in childhood maybe, one of the outcomes that's common is mood disturbance later in life. What we find is that if those adolescents can develop some good friends as teens, their risk for depression or anxiety in adolescence and adulthood is lowered. Those peer friendships serve as a bit of a buffer for some of those early experiences. So I've started to do this, but let's link some of what I've been saying with the social piece and the research on adoption. Now, I really want to make this very clear when we start, is that the research on social outcomes among adoptees shows that there's a huge range of outcomes. Many adoptees do very well socially, so I'm not here to communicate this as a growth area for all adoptees. That's not what the research suggests. But at the same time, for some adoptees, there can be this accumulation of risk factors of a variety of forms that can serve as a bit of a barrier for social development. So one set of risk factors we think of as more biological. So early experiences of abuse and neglect that some adoptees experience does impact parts of the brain that are very important for social functioning. So frontal lobe and the limbic system, if you've taken a neuroscience class, those are really important for emotion regulation, attention, some of those perspective-taking skills. So a lot of the stuff I listed as these are social skills. There's also psychosocial components to it too, because if there's been a lot of disruptions in caregiving, that happens often in institutional care or in foster care, then there maybe has not been the same predictable caregiver from, that a bond can form and serve as that foundational layer for social skills. Also, if there's a lot of frequent residential moves, which happens often in foster care, maybe the individual doesn't have a lot of consistent friends. They're constantly moving schools, and so there just isn't that opportunity to practice some of these social skills in early childhood. There are also post-adoption environment factors that can feed into this too. So in our study, we had some teens, for example, that were adopted at older ages and had already kind of established certain types of social skills and social interaction patterns in their birth country. And then they come here and, if you know anything about social skills, they're very culturally specific. And so they come here and the social interactions are different, and that can just be challenging to navigate. And then also there's a ton of research to suggest that teens can experience, and all adoptees can experience, adoptive and racial and ethnic microaggressions from peers, from other adults. Not always with the intent to harm, but the impact is there, and that can be a barrier to engaging with peers as well. So, all that to say, with all those risk factors that can accumulate for some adoptees, the research, there's quite a bit of research to characterize, okay, when those risk factors accumulate, what kind of outcomes do we see? And so they're listed there. You can see they map on pretty well to the areas of social skills that I talked about. So there's some research that documents social communication, challenges relative to non-adopted folks, things with emotional understanding and regulation, social cognition things, and also the last bullet point I'll draw your attention to is this peer rejection or bullying and victimization, which links sometimes to those microaggressions that I mentioned. So there's a ton of research out there to say, hey, this is an area, at least for some adoptees, especially those who have a lot of accumulated risk factors, that it would be important to provide them some additional support. So like I said, there's a ton of research to say here what the outcomes are, and as I looked at this even before we started the study, and I've looked at it since. There's nobody doing any research about how to do, how to support, how to intervene, how can we provide more opportunities to develop these skills that maybe are affected by some of the early experiences. We were particularly interested in adolescents for a variety of reasons. Part of it was that adolescence is a particularly vulnerable time for adoptees, so the research suggests that some adoptees don't experience any social challenges, through, say, elementary school, but then the first onset, if they do experience them, usually happens in adolescence. As things are getting more complicated, as they're supposed to be more independent in that, as maybe microaggressions might be increasing. At the same time that there's that vulnerability, it's also a window of opportunity. Puberty is a time of rapid brain development and reorganization. Intervening here can produce bigger changes than at other times when there aren't those growth spurts. In fact, there's some really exciting research out from the University of Minnesota to suggest that for folks who've had early abuse, neglect, that puberty is a time where the stress response system kind of can recalibrate. Again, if the support is there with caregivers and the environment. So for all that to say, we're very interested in adolescents. So what we decided to do, given that context, is try to identify an existing research-supported program that we could modify and implement. We wanted something that would address all the social skill domains that I listed and that has been found in the adoptee literature. And what we came upon is this program for the enrichment and education of relational skills, or PEERS as an acronym. I'll describe it in more detail later, but one of the things that we really liked about the program, even though it was originally used in the context of autism, is that the research base was very solid with it, and it hit all the points that we were looking for, and we thought there would be ways that we could modify it to make it a little more trauma-informed, a little more adoption relevant. So a bunch of my colleagues, we flew out to UCLA pre-COVID and spent a couple days there getting trained and certified in this intervention. And then our goal was to implement it and monitor pre to post how the adolescents felt like the program was helpful, their parents, and then we also collected data from their teachers. Their teachers, we didn't tell a lot of detail about the program. So we didn't say it was about social skills or peer relationships. We were hoping as much as possible that the teachers could kind of be outside observers a bit and maybe be a little bit less swayed by placebo effect or things like that. In fact, we gave them questionnaires that had all sorts of questions, not just social skills, sort of as a way to mask a little bit what we were actually studying. So our participants, this is a flow chart for the whole 2 years of the study kind of all added together. So we advertised at local high schools, middle schools, through Adoptive Family Support Network, Post-Adoption Resource Center, all sorts of places that provided social opportunities for adoptive families. And ultimately that led to 88 inquiries, either phone calls or emails to me. And then I conducted phone screenings after that, just to explain the program, answer some questions, make sure they met just our basic eligibility criteria, which you can see listed there. Those phone screenings led then to in-person assessments that were about a half hour or 45 minutes, where we brought both the teen and the parent in, went through the consent process, talked with them about what the program was like. We were really trying to assess, does the teen really want this? Do they want to be here? Many of us have been teenagers or know teenagers, and you can imagine what a group would look like if you had many who wanted to be there and a couple who didn't. So yeah, I don't need to say more about that. After that, we were able to get ultimately 50 families, 50 teens enrolled in the study across the 2-year time span, and 45 of them were able to complete the 16-week group. This was split over 6 different cohorts. So each group had maybe 6 to 8 or 9 adoptees. A little bit about their demographics. We were weighted a little bit more towards women than men. I think we had 28 females, 17 males. More were internationally adopted. About 64%, about 30% were domestically adopted through foster care, the rest through private infant adoptions. You can kind of see their age, and most of them were adopted at around 5-ish, but we had a pretty wide range there. So a little bit more about peers, and I'll go into some detail because I think some of you may encounter this, especially if you're going to be working in applied areas in the future. You might encounter this program. It's been translated into a bunch of different languages. It's offered around the globe, both in schools and in more clinical or applied settings. So Peers is a 16-week group-based intervention. It includes both a teen group that meets for 90 minutes and a parent group that meets for 90 minutes separately, but they meet at the same time. It combines a lot of different strategies. It's partly educational, so you're sharing some information. It's partly modeling, where you're watching some role plays, and in a moment I'll show you a video of one that we worked through. There's some behavioral rehearsal where the teens are actually acting out or practicing some of the things we're talking about. They get a lot of feedback from us and a lot of reinforcement. There's lots and lots of praise and specific positive feedback given. There are also out-of-session homework assignments that are given for the teens, and the parents support that work. So that's why the teen and the parent group kind of meet together. One of the focuses of Peers that makes it a bit different than some other social skill programs is that it's focused on ecologically valid social skills. So that means that it's focused on teaching things that we actually really do in reality, rather than the kinds of things that parents might tell their kids to do, but is maybe not such good advice. So as an example of this, say you walk into maybe the parent is dropping the teen off at a place, at a party, an extracurricular thing, and they know that the teen probably doesn't know a ton of people there. A piece of advice they might give is, just go up and introduce yourself or walk up and say hi to people. It's well-meaning advice, but if you actually watch and look at social research, that's not what we actually do usually. Instead, often when we're seeing a group of people kind of in a circle talking to each other and we want to join that group, usually what we do is we stand a little bit away. We might make kind of infrequent eye contact. We're not staring, but we might glance up to just cue to them we want to join. We listen to what they're talking about. We might wait for a little bit of a pause or a gap, and then we maybe make a comment or ask a question that's related to the conversation. And then hopefully the group opens up and we're able to join that circle. And then maybe introductions happen after there's been a little bit of conversation, right? So we're focused more on the ecologically valid side, that longer piece of how it actually happens, rather than maybe some of the traditional advice. So as I said, it's 16 weeks, and we cover the list of topics that are there. If you're a quick counter, you'll notice there's 13 on here. That's because some of these topics take more than one session. But we start out with conversation skills, talking about sources of friends. Our goal is never to make the teens think that they need to be someone other than who they are. Really, our goal is, okay, how can we help you find people who have some of the same interests as you, who are accepting of you? That's really our goal. We move into things like get-togethers and, okay, how do you host one? How do you ask someone to come over? What kinds of things can you do? And then we move into some of the more difficult aspects of navigating social relationships. So how do you handle a disagreement? We have a whole thing about how do you apologize, and let's practice that. There's plenty of us that could use that lesson. We talk about teasing, we talk about bullying and cyberbullying. So those lessons in particular were really helpful for us because we could bring up some things related to adoptive microaggressions or racial or ethnic microaggressions and really think through with the teens how they wanted to handle those when they came up. And in the parent group, support parents in helping bring up those conversations, asking about those things. How can the parents help the teens navigate those more difficult aspects of social interaction? So the way that the groups went is that, again, they met concurrently at the same time. The teen sessions started usually with about 30 minutes of homework review. So we just go around and share how the homework went, troubleshoot any issues. Homework assignments included things like, for the first couple weeks, they just had to call each other. So they were paired up. Okay, get to know each other, call each other on the phone or video chat. Then we moved into video chatting or connecting with people not in the group. And then the last couple weeks were more focused on having get-togethers with people from school or other extracurriculars. So how do those go? Let's really break it down and celebrate successes usually. That same process happened in the parent room, but took a lot longer. Our goal in the parent room is really to help them be behavioral coaches for their teens. So we spent a long time talking about how things went. How did you try to help? How did that go? How can we improve it for next time? Then next step is the didactic portion or the teaching portion. I say teaching, but really it's very much discussion-based. So we spend a lot of time asking sort of Socratic questions to get the teens to be able to generate some of the ideas is primarily how you go. We use a lot of role-play videos that we show and have them pick out, okay, what's going wrong here? What could they have done differently? Asking perspective, taking questions. So I want to show you actually an example of one of these. My disclaimer ahead of time is these are supposed to be very obviously bad examples. So bad that it's really obvious for the teens to kind of pick out and laugh at and maybe make a little fun of. And so you'll see it's a little blatant. But this is from the lesson about entering a group conversation. So that's that example I gave you about, okay, if you have a group of people talking and you want to join in, how does this go? Okay, so we'll watch this. This is the bad example. At the end of this, usually we'd ask the teens to talk through, what did she do wrong? what did the other people think of her? You know, what could she have done differently?
Hey Jordan, you'll never guess. I saw Gabe at my favorite sushi restaurant this weekend.
No way, what restaurant was it?
Just the one right around the corner.
Oh, I've been meaning to try that place.
Yeah, it's so close by. I felt bad that I'd never gone, but I went and it was so good.
Nice, what did you guys get?
I got the spicy tuna with crispy rice.
Yeah, it looked awesome.
Have you guys ever been roller skating?
Sorry, I just got the regular salmon
There's
roll.
this new skate park that just opened up. It's
I'm
really
sorry,
fun.
What did you get?
Just the salmon roll. It was plain, but
They have
so
a Thursday
good.
night student night. A lot of people go to it.
I've been meaning to go there. I really
Yeah.
wanted to try it out.
It's really fun. There's also this other place
What would you
by the
get if you
beach
went?
that I've been roller skating.
I'm sorry, what?
What would you get if you went?
It's really cool. It's like right by the water and lots of people go.
All right, so you can kind of see that the teens could easily kind of pick out that she was not joining in with the topic of conversation, that she wasn't stopping to listen so that she could contribute something to the flow. So we did a lot of kind of perspective taking discussion about that. All right, then after we generated kind of our list of what we noticed was problematic, what could she do differently, then we would often watch the good example and try to highlight what went well. Started at the beginning.
So Jordan, you'll never guess. I saw Gabe at my favorite sushi restaurant this weekend.
Nice, what restaurant was it?
Just the one right around the corner.
Oh, I've been meaning to check that place out.
Yeah, it's so close by and I'd never gone, but I went and it was really good.
Cool, what did you guys get?
I got a spicy tuna roll and I loved it.
Yeah.
You got the spicy tuna roll? That's what I always get.
Yeah, how good is it?
It's so good there. Have you guys tried the rainbow roll there?
I haven't. No, I actually got the salmon roll.
Oh, okay, that's good too. But
Yeah.
the rainbow roll is like their specialty.
I'll try it.
Cool.
Yeah.
If you were gonna go, what'd you get?
Probably the California roll, it's my favorite.
I've tried that one there actually. It's really good.
Nice.
All right, so a little artificial. These are not professional actors. These are the graduate students at UCLA that help with the program. So you can kind of see this comparison and how it really was able to drive discussion for us as a group. After the didactic session in the teen room, we would do some practice. And so for that session, we would have, some of the teens stand in a circle and be talking, and one teen had to practice joining and exiting the group, and they took turns with that. And then at the end, for both parents and teens, we would reunite everybody all together, review real quickly what the homework is, and do checkouts. So one-on-one, each parent and teen would come and talk with one member of our team, just to make sure there weren't any kind of individual things we should cover. So I'm sure you're all thinking, the last 2 years there's been things going on. I wonder, how we were able to make this work in COVID. So this all started before COVID. So you can kind of see we did our recruitment in 3 waves of data. Our first recruitment started in fall 2019. We started that group in January. And then in March, when everything shut down here, we swapped that to virtual, and we did the last 6 weeks virtually. UCLA had done a really excellent job of publishing virtual guidelines for us within like a week of everything shutting down, so we were able to use all their materials to continue our group. So you can see how many teens were in each. Like in each wave, we had 2 cohorts. So a group of 7 teens and their parents met one night of the week, a group of 8 teens and their parents met a different night that week. You can see wave 2, we started recruiting in summer. That went all through fall, except around Thanksgiving when case counts started to rise again. We did the last 2 weeks virtually. And then wave 3, we were able to do all in person, of course with masks and distancing and symptom checks, all the usual stuff. So I'd love to start now kind of sharing a bit about some of the results. As I do that, I'll talk about some of our pre-post measures that we used. So we asked the teens a whole bunch of different questions. One set of questions was about their social knowledge. So this was really about the content of what we were trying to teach them. How much did they know at the beginning, which is the one all the way to the left, the pre-task, and then at post. You can see a huge increase in their performance on our social knowledge questionnaire. So that would be, questions, it was like a forced choice thing where they were given a scenario like, the first thing you should do when you get into an argument with a friend is, and then they could choose between listen and keep your cool, which is the right answer, or explain your side, which comes later, but isn't probably the first thing you should do, right? So it's those kind of questions that they were doing quite a bit better on after our intervention. We also asked them to think about who is your best friend. They had to write that person down, and then they answered questions from the friendship quality scale about that relationship. How close is it? How much companionship do you feel? And we also saw significant increases in friendship quality with that best friend. Though those effects were, though significant, they were a little bit smaller. We asked the teens to tell us how many get-togethers they were having in the last month. Both before the intervention, we had them fill it out, and then at the end, they filled it out again. And we told them at the end of the intervention, you're aiming for about 4 a month, about 1 a week. Get-togethers are anything informal. Because this was COVID, we said virtual or in person. So things like playing video games with your friends online and having a chat going, that can count as a get-together. So you can see that our get-togethers increased significantly it was at 0 per month hosted get-togethers as a median before, and at close to 3 at the end. And this was during the pandemic, right? So we were really excited by how much they could still do outside, virtually. They got creative. We also asked them how many they were invited to as well, and that increased significantly as well. We had them fill out a questionnaire about their self-esteem or self-concept, and that showed significant improvements from before to at the end of the intervention. We asked them some questions about social satisfaction. How lonely are you? I'll give you an example item. Things like, I have nobody to talk to, I feel alone, or I am well-liked by people in my class. So questions like that, we saw increases significantly so in their social satisfaction, which really is another way of saying they had decreased loneliness. We also asked them about social anxiety symptoms that they might be experiencing. Things like, I worry about being teased, I only talk to people I know really well, I'm afraid others will not like me, and that decreased significantly, as did depression symptoms, which was really exciting to me because if you've been following the national news, during the pandemic, mental health symptoms have increased, at least at a national level, for people in this age group. We gave the parents and the teachers some questionnaires as well. So one questionnaire that both parents and teachers filled out was a social skills questionnaire. So asking questions like, do they start conversations with peers? Do they stay calm when they're disagreeing? Can they say nice things about themselves without bragging? Those kind of social questions. And both parents and teens, or both parents and teachers reported improved social skills. If you remember, that's kind of exciting that the teachers are seeing that because we didn't tell them that that's what we were intervening about, and we sort of hid these questions in a broader questionnaire. So it was exciting for us to see that other people who weren't even going to the intervention were noticing some differences just in these 16 weeks. We asked the parents some additional sets of questions. One was about perspective taking or empathy. So things like, it's hard for my child to see why some things upset people so much, or my child is good at predicting how someone will feel. So we saw big increases there that the parents felt like that was improving. The parents reported on their teen social anxiety, at least from their perspective, and that significantly decreased too. The only thing that we measured that wasn't significantly better pre to post was parents' ratings of how many get-togethers their teens were hosting. So what was interesting is you remember the teens' reports were that they were having more get-togethers. So we took a look at our measure. It's like, what's going on? Luckily, the measure has detail where it asks the teens who was at your get-together, what did you do, and the parents answered those same questions. And when we put those two things side to side, we were able to see that the parents were defining get-togethers pretty narrowly, like a kid came over to my house and they came inside, kind of thing, versus the teens were including things that they had done more informally organized, like, a bunch of neighbors, we met up at the park, or we did this virtually. So there were some things that the teens were counting, which I think are good things to count. They count towards how we were defining it anyway. But because of the pandemic and some of the stay-at-home orders that were in effect during our study, the parent reports of get-togethers were lower. But we think primarily pandemic-related. So all that to say, we were really heartened by what positive outcomes we were able to see. Really significant improvements on almost every domain that we measured based on multiple different raters' feedback. The strongest effects we saw that had like large effect sizes were on the teens' social knowledge, their self-esteem, how many get-togethers they were hosting that they reported, and reductions in their depression symptoms. Those were all large effects. The parents' ratings of social skills and perspective takings was also large effects, and the teachers' rating of social skills were medium level effect sizes. So those were really the areas where we saw the biggest improvement. When we compared our findings to other work that's used the same intervention, but in other contexts, so in autism primarily, increasingly the PEERS is being used in the context of ADHD. And so we saw similar levels of improvement in our study as theirs, which is especially exciting to us because a lot of the original studies with PEERS were randomized control trials where you had, an intervention group and some sort of either control group or waitlist control, which is a much, it's a design that requires more resources than we had to run at Calvin, but is a design that helps you be more confident that the intervention is what's producing the change. And so the fact that our effect sizes and means and stuff were similar to those randomized control trials helped us feel better about our study too. We also took a look at, okay, is this intervention broadly effective, or are there maybe some of our teens that seem to be benefiting more than others? And for the most part, it seemed broadly effective. So there weren't differences in the level of improvement comparing boys to girls, different ages of adoption, different time in the adoptive home. It was kind of equally effective for all those groups. So, kind of last thing I want to convey before we open it up to questions is that we have kind of some hopes both for research that's happening at Calvin, but also in terms of just hopes for applied work in this area in general. So one of our more immediate plans that I have is to follow up with our participants. We're hoping to do that at the 2-year mark after they finish the intervention. So for our very first cohorts, that will be in about a year from now. And we really want to understand, okay, are these gains maintained? Are there things that they've learned since then that would be helpful for us as we continue to think about improving the program itself? The other thing that I'm quite passionate about is increasing access to this program in this area. I'm excited that our team is all certified. There are a few other certified providers in the area and a few PEERS groups being offered. None that I'm aware of that are specific to adoptees. There's just a lot of interest in the adoption community and increasing access to this. So I'm hoping to work with schools and adoption support organizations to increase access to this kind of program. So all that to say, I would love to hear what kind of questions you all have about anything. I'm happy to go into the weeds about a particular thing you want to hear more about, or clarify something, or just think and dream a little bit about kind of future things. So in order to do that, I would love to invite my co-therapists up because they might be able to help me answer some questions. And then also, Ellen has been kind enough to be our roving mic person because with masks it's kind of hard to hear each other. So raise your hand and Ellen can bring you the mic and you can ask us your questions. So my team, Lene, Stacia, Rachel. I know, I feel like I'm just. Anything folks are hoping to ask? Maybe I'll seed us with a question. Can I get this mic on? I'll start us off with a question, maybe while folks are thinking. I wondered, Lene, I know you work in private practice, and I would love to hear a little bit about how you see like programs like this being a part of like the private practice world a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I think a lot of times when people come to therapy, right, you're seeking connection. And I am a therapist that works with trauma. So a lot of times when you think about trauma, not just the impact of an event, but also it takes us out of a relationship of everything, right? A lot of times I hear people struggle with out of relationship with yourself, out of relationship with your community, with your family, friends. And so I see this as being, I think sometimes the group aspect, a lot of times there's validation in a group, right? And if you could bring people together with a similar history, there's a sense of not being alone, which lifts kind of that veil of feeling isolated. And then if you can grow from that place, right, that foundation of connection and seek to enhance skills, some of the symptoms of trauma can be resolved just through that, right? Just through connection, and not to simplify the complexity of working with trauma. But I see it as really complementary and very much needed, right? So I could see that as being really an asset to individual therapy.
Thanks so much. Yeah. And Stacia, sorry. I thought it was on. Is that better? No. Sorry. Ellen, is yours on? Will you just test it for me?
Hello? 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. Stacia, I was wondering if you could say, too, a bit about, you led a couple of the parent groups, and I wondered if you could say a bit about that experience. I talked a lot more about the teen groups here because that's mostly what I led. So, yeah, I'd love to hear a bit more from Stacia about the parent group.
Yeah, so similar to what Lene was mentioning, I think there's a lot of power in group work, right? In the idea of getting together with people who are maybe struggling in the same way, and how that the normalizing factor is so powerful. And I think that was one of the really special pieces that happened in the spaces of those parent groups, because a lot of times when you're struggling with teens in general, but especially teens who have some particular challenges, you just feel very alone. And I'm actually a mother of adopted teens myself. So there's just a lot of isolation in that. And so this was really powerful. And I think they were one of the things that was so encouraging through the whole experience was how surprised the parents were that their teens were doing these things and that they were seeing improvement. I think in a lot of these cases, these families have tried so many different kinds of things, and so it was kind of a shock, like, oh, wow, they really did that, and they did it well, and so that was good. I mean, there's always the challenge of how much coaching do teens really want from their parents? Right, so we did a lot of talking about how do you coach with just a couple sentences instead of 20 minutes of coaching. So anyway.
And hand it to Rachel. I was going to say, Rachel, anything, you did a lot of helping out with the teen groups mostly, reflections that you have about what you think went really well, moments that you thought were exciting in that area.
Yeah, I would probably jump off feasibly what Stacia was saying, and I think, we can all think back on our teen years, right? And It's just awkward and weird, and you're learning these things. And I think what was really powerful about it was like sitting down with a group and saying like, I know some of these things seem like you should know them, but we're gonna talk about them anyways. And it was more of a way to kind of gently say like, maybe you don't have these skills, but we're not gonna like point out that you don't. But we can all learn them together, and it was kind of a safe space to be like, hey, these are all skills that I think are really powerful to have in your life. I mean, honestly, like, I'm a grown adult, and I found all of them helpful, so. So I think that was part of what I really enjoyed is being able to provide that space for teens to, like I said, a safe space to kind of learn some of these things that maybe they weren't comfortable saying they didn't know or weren't as strong in, so.
Can I add one piece? So one of the other, I think, elements of this research project that was really powerful was the role that the students played, especially in those teen groups, because those teenagers were like, oh my word, like these are Calvin students. And if they like demonstrated something or gave some examples from their own life, they were like hanging on the every word, right? Different than, So I think that was just a really powerful element that I loved seeing. And, if one of the college students couldn't be there that week, the teens would be like, where's so-and-so? Are they coming? So that was, yeah. So thanks to the students who are here and your contribution.
Shout out to Kayla, I see you. Yeah. So anything else that you wanted to ask us as we're wrapping up? Susanna?
I was just wondering, in your follow-up with the participants, do you think you'll ask a question about like length of friendship since they did this study and how that was impacted?
Sure. Length of friendships in terms of their best friend kind of questionnaires, or? Yeah, no, that's a great idea. I'm still working on kind of getting the measures together, but I think it would be very easy for us to ask those kind of questions because on the friendship quality scale, we have them name somebody so we can kind of follow up on that relationship. On the get-togethers, they've listed people's names so we can follow up on those. Anecdotally, I know that I hear from parents that some of the participants continue to get together. Some of those relationships were really formed that are still quite tight, and so it's really lovely to see connection still, or parents actually that kind of bonded that are still in communication with each other. Yeah, thank you, Sana.
So I found it interesting that I was with you all along the way until you talked about get-togethers, and that seems to be an important element of your program, is that kids need to get together. But I would think that there are some kids that just are shy, are bashful, they don't want to get together, and so you are encouraging that in this program, right?
Yeah, we were. It's based on the research that suggests that on average, socially skilled teens who have high quality relationships are on average doing social things with a friend. It can just be one. It doesn't have to be a big group, but just one or more about once a week on average. So we were aiming for that. Now you're right, there's definitely some individual differences in terms of what people need out of other, relationships in their life. The thing that we tried to talk a lot in the parent group and in the teen group really is that get-togethers, even if they're informal or short, are really the basis for friendships. That friendships, especially in adolescence, are formed around common interests. And so those get-togethers can be extracurricular things that they might do, an art class or, something like that. So I would say we were trying to skate that balance of, yes, honor what you feel comfortable with and what's best for you, know yourself and your personality. At the same time, more of the teens in our program probably needed a little bit of a push to say, hey, why don't you try to build that friendship a little bit deeper? And to do that, you do really need to hang out outside of school. Yeah, so you're right.
Well, and I think it's also important that, before we ever got to the get-togethers, we spent a lot of time talking about sources of friends, which I think was a particularly challenging area for these folks. So we spent weeks and weeks and weeks talking about, like, how do you find those spaces where the people who are going to accept you, right? Where you're going to have common interests, where you're going to be able to talk about things you're interested in. So when you think about the get-togethers, you also have to think about the building blocks that we were putting in place before getting to that place. Because even with the common interests and the source of friends, that it's also like, how do I enter a conversation? How do I even invite somebody? I mean, we were like at the very basic levels before we were like, hey, let's have some get-togethers. Yep.
And I think about some of the teens that I've been with too, the ones that maybe are more quiet or reserved or tend to like being alone, easily overwhelmed, right? Or just, it's too much. I also see them really wanting like the quality of relationship, right? Like the quality of connection. And even if it's just one, how do you enhance that quality so you can feel connected, so you can maintain that relationship if it's important to you? And particularly for teens that are more isolated or quiet or shy, or keeping like that one person that they feel truly authentically connected to is so important. And so teaching those skills of how do you maintain this and how do you grow this so that even when you are isolated, that person can understand your struggles and still be with you, and it's not compromising your relationships. So maybe that's a little helpful to think of too.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, oh. Yeah, for sure. I think that, maybe I'll start with where we found our participants, mostly through high schools and middle schools, through Adoptive Family Support Network, sending it out to their network through Post-Adoption Resource Center, which is part of Bethany Christian Services, a few other kind of connections. So some of it reflects a little bit of who those organizations serve. I think also our internationally adopted populations are more likely to have had institutional care as part of their early upbringing, and so that brings along some kind of unique challenges related to social relationships if there's like a lot of caregiver turnover in those settings. So I think that's part of it. Also, my research has historically been in the international adoption area, so I just have more connections in that. So no, it doesn't necessarily reflect the larger distribution.
But that first wave actually was.
Yeah, and our first wave was all international as well. Yeah, intended to be so. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, did Brooke have another question? Or sorry, I thought there was one more, but.
My question was just if there's opportunities that you see on a smaller scale, like not in a 16-week setting right now, that community partners could be thinking of doing, whether that's in the social component for the teens or for the parents, but either social or that educational, like those little bits that we could be working as we're putting together programming. Mm-hmm. If you have the ideas of what might be, like we got lots of ideas for fun events, but I'm wondering if there's ways that we could be really intentional of what type of opportunities might better engage the needs of wanting to help these kids make connections.
Yeah, great question. UCLA has actually taken the lead in some interesting ways that we might be able to kind of steal a little bit. They have some programming they call it boot camp programming, where it's sort of a one day really focused on a particular thing. So they serve, for example, young adults, and they have a dating boot camp, and it's like a day on sort of the skills related to dating. Or they have some adolescent ones that are focused just on the hard stuff at the end of our curriculum, handling disagreements, teasing, bullying kind of boot camp. So they have those materials available that sort of pull out particular topics. So I think that's probably like the quickest, easiest thing that we could offer. And given our certification, it would be quite easy for us to offer something like that. Yeah. Well, wonderful. Thanks so much. I'll stick around and answer individual questions if there's things, but I really appreciate your attention and coming. Thanks so much.